Okay, so full disclosure, we went through a wardrobe change here just a second ago. I had a shirt, it's just like a t-shirt, and it was freezing, and so I know this looks like cheap product placement. It's complete functionality. And if you're asking yourself, are you allowed to preach in a hoodie on Christmas? Apparently so. There's so much I'm going to try to get to this morning. This has been a rough one this week. I was talking to Mary, and I said this week, it feels like no matter how much I pray, no matter how much I've studied, no matter how much work I put into it, have you ever had that moment where you feel like your spiritual bucket just has a hole in the bottom of it, and no matter how much you try, you just feel like you're just putting one foot in front of the other? And it's an interesting time for that sort of a week, because I know that Christmas has that effect on some people. I know that there are times, you see everybody else is happy. Does it ever seem like the more happy everyone else seems, the more sad it makes you feel about, if you're already struggling a little bit, when there's contrast and something to compare to of why is everyone else having such a better time than me? When I was a little kid, it started when I was a little kid. I remember, we have kids in the audience, right? I'm going to be delicate. Do you remember that you wanted something from Santa? And then inevitably, as kids, we have bigger imaginations sometimes than Santa has cash. And inevitably, you'll ask for something and you don't get it. And the older you get, the more entitled you feel to what you want, because you're like, okay, I'm not going to ask for anything else. I'm not going to distract him with a whole bunch of little things, because if your Santa was like my Santa, you could give them the list and they would pick whatever was cheapest and be like, well, we didn't get the whole list. Yeah, you got me the things that you added on later. No, I'm only going to want one thing. I'm going to want one thing and one thing only. And then what happens? It doesn't. And you're left with these questions. And I remember it vividly as a kid, be like, why? Why did I not? Am I bad? Because isn't that what we're told? Like, hey, naughty list, nice list. It's really handy when you're in June. But then December comes and you're like, oh, crap, I can't afford. Oh. You just created some sort of anxiety for your kids, right? Because maybe was I on the naughty list? No, I don't think I was that bad. Well, if I wasn't that bad, maybe Santa's not that good. You think your kids don't think through this. I remember it. This year, to give you a for instance, here's what Jet asked for from us for Christmas, is a hunting dog. And the answer is obviously no at this point. He's 9. He's probably more qualified for a hunting dog than most 9-year-olds maybe. Maybe I'm not objective because I'm his dad, but the answer is still no. Now the reason was this, is that if it's a good hunting dog, it means it's hyper. If it's not hyper, then it's probably not a very good dog, right? So you want to buy a 9-year-old a hyper? No, because the way things are right now, he wouldn't get the time that it needed. And so because he's 9, all he's asking for is, will you please get me a terrible dog? No, for your sake and the dog, no. Now, we give him a whole bunch of lists of why. Okay, because this. What do you think he heard? Oh, that's it. That's the only thing. What? No, why? Then you tell him, he's like, you go through all the effort, like, here's the whole list of why. And he's like, okay, but why? See that there's some parents, you know what I'm going through. You think maybe it's possible, is it possible that maybe the Santa himself, because he's real, because he's there. You think maybe the reason that we do that, I heard a thing on social media that said, would you please stop giving the good presents under the guise of chimney-related gift. This is hard for me. I'm having to be careful because you can appreciate what I'm trying to say. Because what happens if this kid over here, his Santa gift isn't, can you see how that would create some like, well, was that kid better than me? Like you go to school and you're like, Santa bought you a Mercedes. Sweet. I got socks. Maybe you must have been better. Wouldn't you think, according to the way it's set up, wouldn't you think like that means you must have been that much better? What am I doing so wrong? What am I doing so bad? I watched a documentary, and maybe you've seen it. It's a documentary. It's called Gleason. It's about a guy that gets ALS. And he says this, and it was a quote, and it just kind of stuck with me. He said, I'm told that God could heal me, and I want him to, if he loves me, I don't understand why he wouldn't. Now, if you're thinking that seems like a completely unfair transition from like Christmas puppy to one of the hardest questions that we as people ask, you got to understand this is the time of year where people are asking tough questions. I would hate to think that you could come to church and we just bypass it and leave you on your own. If you're here and you're asking tough questions, I would like to think that this is a sort of place where we can acknowledge tough questions and at very least explain to you what we understand to be the answers. But man, I'm watching this and I'm going, God, this would be such a good opportunity. Why? He wants to believe like this is a guy, this is a perfect candidate. High profile, he's visible, he wants to be healed. He's saying like he will give you credit if you heal him. This seems like the guy. And isn't it funny because just like when we were little, you ask God for something and man, here's the thing. When you ask God for something that's not bad, like if you ask God for your own private jet and he doesn't give it to you, there's a little part he's like, yeah, fair enough. Touche. But sometimes we ask God for things that are completely fair to ask for. And we don't get it, and then we're left all of a sudden we're the little kid again going, wait a minute, why not? I know you can. I'm told that you can. Why not? Am I not good? Was I bad? And then you go, well, this seems worse than anything that I would have earned for myself. So wait a minute. If I'm not getting what I'm asking for, because we've all prayed for healing, we've all prayed for provision, we've all seen situations that we go, God, just please make that situation better. That's unfair. That's a good person getting something it doesn't deserve. Can you please make that better? And we get the answer that we don't want. And all of a sudden we're asking the same questions. So there's a couple questions. I have a couple questions, and one of them is, can a God who would willfully allow suffering ever be trusted? Because, man, I'm going to tell you, when people say they don't trust God, it's almost always it's connected to a moment where they said, I desperately needed something from God, and he allowed a situation that I can't rectify in my own head. That in my own mind, I can't make sense of why God would allow this if he is who he says he is. We have one more question that we're going to get to, but when you ask about things like healing, we as a church, the American church, as Jesus follows, we're famous about saying, oh yeah, you don't pray for healing. He can do it. He healed this guy and he healed this guy and he did this and he provided for this guy and this guy was broken and they provided a car. And let me tell you something. If you're the one that is in need, finding out that someone else got the healing that you've been praying for doesn't give you a warm, fuzzy feeling. Like that's good for that guy. There's a story in John 5, and now we had to go through that because there's a part of this story that we probably heard the story that I'm about to read, but there's a part of this story that stands out to me, and that is in John chapter 5, verse 1. It says, sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals. Now there's a pool in Jerusalem near the sheep gate, a pool which is called Bethesda. Verse 3 says this, here a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, and the paralyzed. So if you think of this, there's a large group of people that have issues, they have needs. They've got a Christmas list. And their Christmas list is serious stuff. And there's a group of them, and it says this. You know what it doesn't say? It doesn't say that Jesus was walking down the road one day and he saw one guy all by himself over by the pool of Bethesda. Everybody else was fine. Everything else was good. I think sometimes it's so much easier to believe that we're the only one that has problems, that we're the only one suffering while everybody else is happy. But it says that this guy was in a group. He was in a group of people that all had needs. And then it says this. It says one who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked, do you want to get well? Now, if you got to understand, somebody's listening to this, so you've got a need. Jesus comes walking in, and he walks right to you, and you're like, oh, and then he walks right past you. And he goes to this other guy, and he goes, do you want to be healed? See me, I just want you to see me. And he goes, do you want to be well? Now, you know that if Jesus asked, do you want to be made well? What are you supposed to say? Yes, and I believe you can, and I'm going to operate in faith, and if you believe you receive, and what other bumper stickers do we have? This guy says this, sir, I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I'm trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me. Imagine how annoying. You're like, no, stupid, that's the wrong answer. He's offering. You say yes. You're not doing it right. You're not doing it right. If you want to get your healing, we all know there's a system of steps that you have to follow. This guy just goes, well, I mean, I would, but here's my excuse for why it never will happen. Does that feel like a demonstration of faith? Does that feel like a guy who's standing on the promises of God? Or does that sound like a guy who is completely unaware of who he's dealing with? So he gets the answer completely wrong. Then Jesus said to him, get up, pick up your mat and walk. At once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked. You're like, okay, maybe he's starting with that guy. And he started with like the least likely, and he's working his way up to me. Because I know all the answers, and I know how to do it. I know how to do this. And that was it. It says there was a great many people, and he healed one of them. What stands out is there was a whole bunch of people that says that Jesus stood right there and walked by them and left them feeling like you have felt if you've ever prayed for something and God didn't do it. If you've ever prayed for something and felt justified in what you're asking for, if you've ever prayed for something on behalf of someone else and had God say no, it says there's a whole group of people that are experiencing what you've experienced. Jesus walks away and they start going, well, am I bad? What makes that guy more deserving of healing than me? Does God love him more? Did I do something wrong? Well, if I didn't do anything wrong, how? And isn't it almost worse, honestly, isn't it almost worse when somebody unwraps the present that you've been praying for? Oh, cool, you got that promotion at work. Good for you. That's really good. Have you ever, honestly, and it's been a long time, but I will admit there have been times in my life where somebody wins the lottery, and I'm like, I could do better with that. That guy's just gonna mess it up, not me. I would give most of it away. I would give like 90%, 30, like 10% of it away because that's tithe. You know it's true. When somebody else gets what you've been praying for, there's this resentment that develops. There's this moment of like, why? What? Don't you think that somebody in that group felt that way? Don't you think somebody watched that and felt a moment of resentment? And it's worse. It's worse when God proves that he can. That's the worst. Because if you're praying for something is serious, something in your life, whether it's a healing, whether it's provision, whether it's whatever it is, whatever sort of breakthrough you're praying for, whatever sort of miraculous moment you're praying for, and you then learn that God fully is capable of doing that, but that he hasn't, you can be honest, we're in a safe place. Isn't there a moment where you go, okay, that's almost worse? You're proving that you can, but now you just won't. I remember when I was a little kid, I would say that I was probably 8. We had a little friend named Trace Gibson, and he was 7, so he was almost my age, and he got leukemia. And we would go visit him in the hospital. And listen, this is not to sort of try to tie an emotional tie. I'm just saying this, I remember these moments as a kid. And we're praying that God would heal Trace. And you hear these stories, these other little kids that go in and the doctor just gives them a clean bill of health. And you go, he can do it. And he didn't heal Trace. It was the first person that I ever knew close to my age that passed away. And I remember that moment of like, God, but now as a parent, man, you want to talk about seeing things from a completely different perspective. I go back to Randy and Vicky's position, Tracy's parents, and you go, what would you do? What would you do in that moment? Because we're talking about you got to trust God, right? How could you trust a God that would willfully sit back and allow something to continue when you're can you imagine? I've never been in that position, but now being a parent, man, it's like it hurts all over again. And even if I haven't been in that position, I know that position happens a lot. Times like that happen a lot where someone's praying for something serious and God says no. I have a friend named Ed Ditforth. He's a pastor in Stephenville, and he was talking about his dad. His dad got cancer, and he was praying for his dad, and he was fasting. He was praying. He's just faithfully praying for his dad to be healed. And he said that God told him one day, he just laid it on his heart. He just said, hey, I'm not going to heal your dad. He said, but I tell you what, From that moment, Ed says, from that moment on, when I had a peace that God was going to take my dad home, I had a peace about where he was going, and all of a sudden I got to enjoy the rest of my dad's life because God let me in on what his plan was. It changed my perspective. Instead of just keeping my head buried, asking for something, asking for a yes when God was saying no, he said it changed my perspective. But that does bring me to another question. Can we trust a God who would say no when we're desperate for a yes? Think of this. Have you ever, more times than I can count, desperately asking God for something and then having to deal with the fact that he's saying no and having to come to terms with the fact that he's saying no when I'm begging for a yes? It is so hard, it is so difficult in those moments to not have resentment sneak in and go, hey, what are we doing here? Why are you being so faithful to a God that's allowing something so horrible? Remember me saying I wanted to be at least willing to ask the difficult questions? I know this seems like a lot, and it seems like we've sort of painted ourselves into a corner, but in reality, I would say a majority of us in this room, whether we would admit it at Christmas or not, have been to a point where we go, God, I only had one thing on my list. I only asked for one thing. I only needed one thing. I needed it so badly. I needed it so badly, I didn't even ask for anything else. Now I'm going to tell you this. I don't know why. I don't know why God chose the guy that he chose at Bethesda. I don't know why God says yes here and no there. I wish I could give you an answer. I wish there was a formula. Honestly, I wish there was a formula that says, you really, really want it? Like you really, really, really want it? Give 30%. Stay up late, get up early, go through all the motions, have the more amount. I would love to tell you there's a formula, but based on the word, it says there is no formula. Why did he choose the guy at Bethesda? Because that's who he chose at Bethesda, and that's all I can tell you. I wish I could give you a better answer, but here's this movie, Gleason, and I'm watching it, and I will readily admit to you guys, I was watching it all by myself in my trailer, and I mean physically, it got me. Because he goes to a faith healer who has a formula. And the faith healer tells him, if you really want your healing, you have to have so much faith. Because isn't that what we're told? If we don't get what we're asking for, maybe we didn't have as much faith as the next guy. Maybe this guy got what he was asking for because he had more faith, or that somehow he's a better Christian, which leads us to believe like, well, then we could never be good enough. Why are we even trying? All the weird questions. And it says, if you believe it, you'll receive it. Now, take whatever part of your body is hurt and you begin to move in it. And I'm watching this, I'm like, oh no. It's hard to watch. It's hard to watch because you know what's going to happen, and I wasn't expecting this. Steve Gleason stands up, he walks to the front, and he says, I'm going to run. His body is failing. He's got ALS. He's struggling to even walk, but he buys in, and he says, all right, you say that's how it works. You say that's how you get what you want from God. Man, it's this gut-wrenching moment of like, would somebody please intervene? Would somebody please just... And he takes off running across the front, and he can't keep up, and he falls. Let me tell you this. If in the back of your mind you feel like that there's something that you haven't done to earn whatever it is, it would be, we just want to believe that somewhere there's a button that we haven't pushed. We just want to believe that somehow there's some formula that we can follow so that we can be the guy at Bethesda, so that we can be the guy that gets picked out of the group. We want to deep down believe that somehow there's some sort of a formula. Let me tell you, if it was a matter of operating at a faith level, that guy wins. He's healed that day on camera in front of everybody, and he wasn't, which means this. I don't have an answer for why God says yes here and no there. I wish I did. But here's what occurs to me as I'm sitting there watching this movie, is that the enemy has become so effective at taking your focus and placing it on something temporary so that you lose track or forget altogether what is eternal. So effective at causing us to believe that the temporary could provide something that only comes at an eternal level. Let me explain what I'm talking about. Your eternity couldn't have even been on your own wish list. Healing, sure, you could pray for that. Finances, sure, absolutely, you can pray for that. Provision, protection, all the stuff that comes with it, yes, you could pray for that. I have a friend that said the only thing I ever asked God for was that he would protect my brother, and my little brother died. He said, I asked God for one thing, and God didn't give it to me. There are going to be times that you ask God for something, and God says no. But eternity couldn't have even been conceptualized for your wish list. Let me tell you what I'm talking about. Nobody in their right mind would have proposed to God, hey, God, I got an idea. How do you feel about this? How do you feel about sending your son, your only son? How do you feel about sending him to earth as a sacrifice so that everything bad that we did, he gets, and that we can be forgiven? That's a list that doesn't even factor in. We couldn't have even got there in our own head. You go, well, yeah, we know that's true, but what about in the meantime? Let me tell you about in the meantime. Let me tell you what happens in the meantime when we're praying and God says no. Matthew chapter 26, verse 36. Then Jesus came with them to a place called Gethsemane. He said to his disciples, sit here while I go over there and pray. He took with him Peter and 2 sons of Zebedee and began to be grieved and distressed. Ever felt grieved and distressed? Ever felt like that you could just sweat bullets? Did you ever feel like you were so desperate you would do anything? God, would you please do anything to answer this? I'm only asking one thing. It says that that's exactly the position that Jesus finds himself in. He is grieved and he's distressed. And he says this, my soul is deeply grieved to the point of death. Verse 39, it says he went a little bit beyond them. So that means Jesus separated himself from even Peter and the sons of Zebedee. It says that in the midst of his most gut-wrenching hours on earth, it says that he separates from them and he walks over here to God and he goes, okay, it's just you and me now. It's just the two of us. And he says this, my Father, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me. The fact that you have asked God for something and been told no, I get it. There are times that it does cause questions that seem to have no answers. But here's what I know. Your eternity was set into place because once upon a time, Jesus did the... It's the same thing that his own son asked him for something and God said no, and your eternity is set into place because of it. So if it's your reason for holding God at an arm's length and go, I don't know if I can trust God, you've also got to consider that he did something for you that you couldn't have even asked for that's permanent. I have a theory on why he separated himself from the disciples. I haven't ever heard this taught. I haven't heard anybody else talk about this. I haven't read it anywhere else. But I believe this. I believe that if Peter and the sons of Zebedee would have witnessed God himself, Jesus, asking for something and God the Father saying no, I have a theory that would have been so damaging to their faith that they might not have ever recovered. I think it's possible that we place so much value on the temporary and we judge God so strictly based on the temporary that we get distracted and we forget what he's already done for the eternal. I think if we're being fair, both have to be considered. But then he says this, here's what separates Jesus from us a lot of times. Here's the difference between what Jesus asked and what we say, because as people, as broken people, our tendency, and I'm not saying we've all said this, but our tendency is, God, if you will just do this for me, then here's what I'll do for you. God, if you'll just give me this, then here's what I'll give you. And Jesus says this is what I'm asking for, but ultimately, I want what you want more than what I want. Yet not as I will, but as you will. Isn't it interesting to think that the only thing God has ever said no to are things that are temporary? Shouldn't that be considered when we're considering trusting God, trusting who God is? That God has only ever told you no about things that are temporary, and the things that are eternal, he has said yes to? He said, not only did he say yes, he said yes at his own expense. He said yes when it cost him something. He said yes when it was more damaging to him than it was to you. I read a quote, actually Lacey read it to me. It says, show me the God that you've rejected or the God that you don't believe in. It's possible that I don't believe in him either. That's Timothy Keller. And I think sometimes because of our distraction on the things that are temporary, in our minds, we create this God that doesn't care. I don't believe in a God that doesn't care. we create in our minds this God that's distant. Well, based on what he's done for us, I don't believe that he's distant. We create in our minds this concept of God that's based on hurt or hurt feelings. It's this same moment where we wake up on Christmas morning and we don't have the thing in our stocking that we wanted that started when we were a kid. We carry that into adulthood. And the reality is you have to consider the whole picture of who God is and why Christmas matters. It's got to be considered. I mean, if we're going to make an opinion of God, if we're going to base an opinion of our interaction with God, it's got to be considered that he did for you what you could have never done for yourself. Romans 8:32 says, he who did not spare his own son. If that's where it ended, that should be enough. God's done more for you than you could have ever done for him. The difference is God is an immeasurably perfect God, and you're a flawed being. And he's still done more for you than you've done for him. But he gave him all up for us. How will he not also, along with him, graciously give us all things? Here's an interesting question, and I'm about done. Jesus healed a lot of people. Jesus raised people from the dead. Jesus did a lot of things for people that were ultimately temporary. We know that everybody that he healed died. Spoiler alert if you haven't read it. He did a lot of miracles. He did a lot of things on his first campaign in Galilee that proved that he was who he said he was. Here's my question. All those people that received all those healings and all those temporary things that God did for them, here's my question. When Jesus was being crucified, where were they? If you think that somehow God answering your one prayer that's on your wish list will somehow miraculously infuse your faith to the point that you become the Christian that you want to be, the word gives us no indication that that's how it works. The people who stick it out are people who go, God, this is what I would like, but it's your will, not mine. I know that. Mind-boggling to me. How were the angels not mourning the birth of Jesus? In light of what we know, how was there not this deep mourning over the fact that Jesus had been born? That they were celebrating the love that God had come to the earth for you. That tells us so much about the love he has for us. That consumes, that overwhelms any amount of doubt that comes with the questions in my mind. I can't consider what God did through Jesus on my behalf without forgetting any bad thing that I've had to temporarily go through, because even a healing isn't going to make me somehow a better Christian. The healings were brought on to establish who Christ was, but that's a separate sermon. I can't listen to Jesus asking for something and being told no and ever again feel slighted by God for not giving me what I've asked for. So what does it look like then to trust him? What does it look like to be somebody who goes, man, there's a lot I don't get. There's a lot I don't understand. Why would God not heal a guy who stands up in front of a room of people? Isn't it interesting how not insecure God is? If it's me, I would feel obligated to heal somebody who did something like that. But God says, hey, I'm going to use your story. I'm going to use your temporary struggle. I'm going to use what you're going through. Because isn't that what he said? He's close to the brokenhearted. Doesn't it say that you have access to God in the midst of trials that you wouldn't have otherwise? Isn't it interesting sometimes there are people that their only connection to God is their struggle? The only connection they have to God is that there's a struggle and they don't want to make God mad, and so they stay close enough to God because they don't want to ruin their request. They don't want to destroy their. Isn't that interesting that if your struggle is the only thing connecting you to God, it is your most valuable asset? Whatever it is that connects you to a God that loves you so much that he sent his son, whatever is required to bring that into fruition is worth it. But it also says that he will use your temporary position to create eternal good. How many times have you seen people come to Jesus because someone is struggling gracefully? Says that he's got so many plans, so many good things in the midst of your story. Listen, if he's going to heal you, he's going to heal you, and that's great. We can continue to pray. We can continue to ask. Nowhere in the Bible does it say, stop asking. But what would it look like to trust God fully and completely? What would it look like to consider all the parts and all the pieces? What would it look like in the middle of Christmas to go, why were they celebrating? I get why we're celebrating. I get why we're happy. I get why Christmas is what it is. I get why everything about Christmas means what it means. But why were the angels celebrating? Jesus said, can we do this another way, but ultimately, your will, not mine. Now, God says no to Jesus. Do we remember this concept that every no is a yes? Do you remember this? Just a refresher real quick. Every time that I tell my kids no, I have to remember that I'm also telling them yes. Every no in your life is also a yes. Let me explain what I'm talking about. If my kids say, can I have more candy? I say no. But what I'm saying yes to is a healthier diet. They sleep better at night. There's health benefits. There's a yes that comes with a no, right? Every yes, if you'll look hard enough, every time God has told you no, he's also saying yes. And the enemy would love to distract you and tell you that a no is just a no and that no is somehow a rejection. And every time you've prayed for something and you haven't got it was somehow an indictment on God. But what the word says is that he brings so many yeses out of every single no. So the question is not, why am I getting a no? The question will be this. Here's what my encouragement to you would be. God, please bring healing to this situation, or help me to see the yes that you have for me in the midst of the no. Please help my faith to grow to the point that I can see that you're at work in my life and that you from the beginning have had better for me than I've ever had for myself. And if I can remember that, my love for you is going to grow, my faith is going to grow, my trust is going to grow, and I'm going to discover things in the midst of a no that I couldn't have ever discovered had you said yes. When God told Jesus no, he was telling you yes. I don't think it's fair to be insulted with God over a no when it was a no that set your eternity into place. The more I dig and the more I learn and the more I've researched, what I've found is this. God has never given you a reason to distrust him. Can you imagine the arguments that would be met with? Well, I think we've all at some point felt justified in distrusting God, but the truth of the matter is, if every no was a yes, when God told Jesus no, he told you yes to a question you couldn't have even conceptualized on your best day. God is operating to make sure, and I'm going to end it with this, and please hear me. If you haven't heard anything else, hear this right here. God has made sure that every struggle that you're experiencing is temporary. Through the struggle that Jesus experienced that began at Christmas. Let's pray. With heads bowed and eyes closed for a second, I would hate to think that we don't capitalize on an opportunity. I don't know how many of you guys will see again. I hope all of you. I hope everybody's going to be back. But in reality, what a sad thought to think that you would come to church and not be given at least truth. So here's what I'm going to ask. If you need to accept Jesus into your life, the Bible says there is one way. Oh, I would love to think it was different. I would love to tell you that there's a lot of different ways and that you can just try to be a good person, but that's a no. That's a no. God says there's not a lot of ways. There's one way, and that way is Jesus. That the only thing that separates your problems from being temporary or permanent is Jesus. That's it. So this morning, if you would say, hey, I know I've held God at arm's length. I know that I've experienced things that cause me to distrust God, but in fairness, I don't think I considered all of it. I don't think I considered the fact that God told Jesus no for me and on my behalf. If you're here this morning and you say, I need to accept Jesus into my life, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pray. It's a prayer of salvation. If you look at Romans 10:9 and 10, it walks you through the process. It's very, very simple. It says if you believe in your heart and confess with your mouth that Jesus is who he said he was and did what he said he did, that you'll be saved. And that every negative thing in your life has an expiration date from that point forward. I want to pray. Just pray with me. Dear Lord Jesus, thank you for loving me. Thank you for dying on a cross, being raised from the dead so that I could be forgiven. Help me to find the yes in every no. Please forgive me. With heads bowed and eyes closed just for a second without anybody looking around. We're not going to ask anybody to come to the front. We're not going to embarrass you or anything like that. But here's what I'm going to ask. I know there are people here. I know statistically, look how many people are here. There's somebody here that has said, I have resented God for a long time. I asked God for something and I didn't get it. I felt completely justified in keeping God at arm's length, and this morning you say, I'm just tired. I'm tired of that. I'm exhausted. I'm exhausted from trying to keep God in a box. I'm exhausted from resenting God for this long. And in fairness, I don't even have a good excuse for it. This morning you're here and you say, this morning, right where you're at, if you accepted Jesus into your life, if you asked Jesus to come into your life and take control, right where you're at without anybody looking around, would you raise your hand? I want to be praying for you this week. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, thank you. Once it's up, you can put it back down. Thank you. Lord, you see the hands. Lord, I'm even gonna say there were probably a few people that said yes that didn't feel comfortable raising their hands. God, I pray for the Steve Gleasons of this church that have said, God, if you can do it, why aren't you? God, for those difficult moments when you don't do what we thought you were going to do, or when you do things differently than we would have done them, God, help us to be people who overlook that and realize, God, that every no is a yes. God, that our life is full of yeses and full of opportunities and full of good if we're just able to see it. Help us to be who you've created us to be. And God, it's so common that the struggles are what turn us into who you wanted us to be. That God, nobody would opt for struggles, but God, in the midst of those, we grow in our capacity and our depth. We grow in our ability, and God, people connect to our struggles. That God, we are more effective, we are more useful for reaching people for the kingdom based on our struggles than on our successes. God, there's so much good to be harvested that you have developed for us, even in the midst of a no. Help it to take root, I pray in Jesus' name, amen. One more thing before I turn it over to the worship team. The doctrine or the theology of it will say that God has saved you. Raise your hand for salvation. He comes in and he says, you're saved, I've forgiven. It's like it never happened. It says that he has saved you. It says that he is saving you. And that means this, that you will leave here this morning. You're like, all right, I'm living for God. What's that going to be like? Oh, guess what? It still comes with struggles. Everybody here laughing? Mature Christians, because they're like, yep. It says he is saving you, not because he's going to remove all the struggles, but because he's got purpose for you in the midst of them. He's turning you into who he wants you to be. It says that he found you where you were, but he loved you too much to leave you there, so he's bringing you through a process that's taking, and it says that we will be saved, and that's what happens at eternity. That's where we go into heaven, and we go, I don't even remember what the struggles were. Who cares? Look where I'm at. You've been saved, you're being saved, you will be saved.